Hello and welcome to Mr. Gunn's revision session, especially for the mock exam that's coming up after Christmas. This session will take you through 2 units, that is half the size of your actual examination, and we will be looking at the existence of God and immortality and trying to make it clear how to score full marks. This may help you revise for your final exam, but just be aware that what we're going through today is only 2 of the 4 units, of course, that you'll be answering in the final exam, and that the questions are sure to change. When you get your mock paper, you'll see a front cover that looks a little bit like this, different times and dates, of course, and this is an old paper. So it doesn't have the additional 4 marks on the front for spelling, punctuation and grammar, as that was only added a couple of years ago. Thank you to Michael Gove. This slide shows you what I mean when I refer to a set of questions on one topic. This topic is, of course, the existence of God then, and we have 5 questions here on the existence of God. And it would represent 1/2 of your mock, or 1/4 of your final exam. The other set of questions I'll be taking you through today will be on immortality. So we've chosen topics that are the most recent topic you've been looking at, which is immortality, and also the furthest away, which was the existence of God. So one that you'll have to really go back and independently revise, and another one that should be a bit fresher to you. As I've stated, there's an additional 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. And the way these are marked is to look at your 6-mark questions, particularly, and to score the highest performance that you show in any one answer. So if in one of your answers you show high performance, you'll receive 4 marks. And to do that, as it says here, you have to use correct spelling, punctuation, rules of grammar consistently, and a range of specialist terms. So when we ask you for a target to use keywords or use technical language or use philosophical terminology or religious terminology, that's to try and help you get the high performance demand of the examination. Another structural technique that you can use is to make sure that you're using paragraphs and adopting different perspectives to discuss the issues from. As we go through the paper today, I'm going to try to follow a basic style. 3 steps to answer each question. Some of the steps shouldn't take very long, just a moment, but it's worth thinking about this as an examination technique. And the first step is to ask exactly what the question is asking you. So the first step is, what is the question? Not the question you wish you were being asked, the actual question that's on the paper. Check the wording specifically. And what I'll be doing with some of the questions as we go through the paper today is highlighting key question wording to identify exactly what the examiner wants from you. The next step is to have a quick look at how many marks are available. This is because you need to write an appropriate amount depending on the number of marks available. This means for a 1-mark answer, you should answer it within just 1 sentence only. For 2 marks, 2 sentences maximum. And for a 6-mark question, at least 3 separate paragraphs. And if you quickly glance at the number of marks available, it can let you know that you've written enough or not enough, depending on the question. The final tip I'm going to recommend is that you use your spare time to check your answers. Even if it's briefly, it can make a big difference. Check that you've used all the keywords that you've been revising, and particularly in 6-mark questions, check that you've made a specific reference to a religion, or that your phrasing is something that you're happy with. For example, we very consistently practice saying some religions such as Christianity, and we know that tailoring our answer in that way can be the most flexible and useful way to score maximum marks. Without any further ado, I'm going to take you through the ways we'd recommend to score maximum marks in this paper. Of course, this is not your mock paper, but this is a practice, and a lot of the information will be useful to you in your actual exam, but it might be that instead of the argument from morality being a 3-mark question, it appears as a 6 lower down the paper, or that instead of the religious experience question being a 3-mark question, perhaps the religious experience question, Rex question, will be a 4-mark and so and so. But the information will still be useful to you, but the order may change and the emphasis may change, and that's what you've got to be prepared for. The first question then is explain the argument from morality for God's existence. And as we've said, the first thing that we're going to do is look at the question wording. That's the argument from morality for God's existence. Now, it's this bit that a lot of people miss out, explain the argument from morality for God's existence, and that's because this entire unit examines traditional arguments for God's existence. They're not arguments without direction, and sometimes people miss to debate and talk about whether or not they actually serve, not in themselves, but as sufficient evidence for God's existence, and that's a particular bit of a question to focus on. The next point is to know that it's 3 marks, so 1 paragraph will be enough for this question. That's enough of our time. Now for 3 marks, we recommend that you make sure that your argument is well developed. For 2 marks, you need 2 simple correct points, and therefore to meet 3 you need sound knowledge and understanding. That's what the mark scheme says, which means that you'll have selected and explained some from the following relevant points, which is that the argument from morality says that people have a powerful sense of right and wrong, or an inbuilt sense. This comes from a source outside of themselves. And we don't mean Jiminy Cricket, we mean a higher authority or God, and therefore God exists. Explanations that say that morality is a system of ethics which distinguishes between right and wrong, and that people try to be moral even when they may prefer to do something else, and that this may come from a higher authority that would receive credit as well, and that this ultimate authority seems to come from beyond just society and the law, because law in the past have sometimes been immoral, for example, slavery. Here's an example then of a reasonable amount to write for a 3-mark question. People have a powerful sense of right and wrong. This comes from a source outside of themselves, which could be God. Therefore, this must be God, as people are then free to choose whether to follow or not. A basic formulation of the moral argument that would score 3 marks. For a question such as this, why some people disagree, that's arguments against the argument from morality for God's existence, that would be, as is stated in question 1, but not kindly re-put in question 2. But all of these are for God's existence. So it's why do some people disagree with the argument from morality improving God's existence? And you're looking for 2 marks, so we need 2 simple points. The mark scheme identifies a huge number of correct points. I'll read a few out and then put an example down, which is that morality is hard to prove. We can't prove it using scientific experiments. It may just be rules to control people derived from evolution or not God. People who cooperate may survive better, so it may be explained through Darwinian evolutionary theory. Some people go against their upbringing. Not everybody feels guilt, because punishment around the world differs culturally. People may have a different experience of what's right and wrong, or a different view, rather, of what's right and wrong. So here's an example 2-mark answer, which is that morality is hard to prove empirically, and furthermore, many have doubted it comes from God. Freud, for example, believed that it came from our upbringing. Let's have a look. How would I be doing on the spelling requirement using a keyword like empirically, which means scientific method, and using a key scholar like Freud would be helping me out on my way to getting the 4 marks. Now, this question is one of the questions where it's so important to have a good look at the question. Again, we're talking about whether or not this stuff proves God's existence, and we're looking at people experiencing God, which we sometimes call REX, religious experience, and continue to examine the question to see that all you have to do is explain your opinion. That means do not balance the argument. You don't need to, unless your opinion is a balanced one. So you don't need 2 paragraphs here, and you don't need to say, However, others disagree and say, such as, just because you've revised that material, this is 3 marks for a developed opinion of your own that's relevant entirely to this question. The mark scheme actually says particularly that for 3 marks you'll have an opinion supported by one well-developed reason or several simple reasons. For the purpose of this resource, I'm going to answer occasionally in favour and occasionally against. For religious experiences, I'm going to start with, let's go with in favour of religious experience for proving God's existence. Okay, so we might say something like millions of people claim to have had a religious experience, making them count as good evidence for God's existence. And they also include key figures throughout history, such as St. Paul, who had a conversion on the Damascus Road. Further evidence can include the profound effect it has on people's lives. For example, St. Paul stopped stoning Christians to death after his conversion. What a guy. Checking my answer to make sure that I receive full marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Seeing as I'm arguing in favour of God's existence, I'm trying to make that capital G there. Not the best, but I've made it capital because it fits in with my answer. You can make the choice, depending on the point you're making, as to whether or not you provide God with a capital letter. Okay, looking at this question, explain why some people do not believe in God. This is the skill of advocacy. It may be that you have to step out of your own shoes and represent another person's view, or write at a distance so that it is representative of a group and not just your own view. For 4 marks, we need to produce a substantial paragraph at least, or 2 short paragraphs, with some development of each point that we make to score full 4 marks, or as the mark scheme says, clear knowledge with some development or analysis. And some of the points that some people may include why they don't believe in God include, of course, their upbringing. They may be raised as an atheist, or they may be raised in a religion such as Buddhism that doesn't require the belief in a God. They may point to all the evil and suffering in the world, or they may say that we've made more progress using science. They may say that there are faults in arguments for God's existence, none of them are conclusive, or that they themselves have never met God, never had their prayers answered, or that the old authority of God as explanation for health, for weather, for behaviour is no longer needed, as we have increased our knowledge of those sorts of events. I'm not going to provide you with an example of this one, as I think it's fairly straightforward. And I'm running out of time, and I've just received a message from my wife saying I've got to put my son in his Christmas jumper. No, I haven't done that yet. Okay, God is the first cause of the universe. This is the causation argument. Do you agree? So we're going to need your opinion. We need reasons for your answer. And we need to think about more than one point of view. So it's not only if you agree, it's why would others not agree. And then we've got this added dimension of making sure we mention a religion. And we know that without mentioning a religion, you can only get a maximum of 3 marks, which is why we refer to something specifically religious in every answer to ensure that we can get up to 6. On the mark scheme, it says that for 6 marks, your argument will be well argued with consideration of reasoning from different points of view, showing your ability to apply knowledge and understanding. Sticking with arguing in favour of God for this unit, I'll argue against God in the second. I would structure paragraph 1 around agreeing so that we make sure that we express our own opinion. I agree. And alongside many religious believers, so we've got our first reference to religion. It's nice to do it early to be sure that you've met that criteria, such as Christians, that God is the first cause of the universe and then I'm going to move straight into talking about my key scholar, Thomas Aquinas, as I would then continue to say as St. Thomas Aquinas, that argued that as everything in the universe is natural, that means that it has been caused by something else, as nature follows the law of cause and effect. This means that whatever started the entire process must have been non-natural to be capable of starting the process, and Thomas Aquinas would have called this the uncaused cause of the universe, which must be a non-natural property outside of time and space, and therefore could only be God. And then I followed this up with just a snippet of an example of paragraph 2 that should help you with the style here. So if paragraph 1 is in agreement with the Christian view, then paragraph 2 should represent a different opinion. So you might say something like, however, others may argue that the Big Bang theory may have explained that the universe has arisen from nothing, or ex nihilo, and that there is other evidence for the Big Bang. We can observe, science has helped us observe the expansion of the universe, for example, or that there's no real proof that God caused the beginning of the universe produced so far. This argument, and then I move into evaluating this argument, because in paragraph 1 I've said that I agree here with the religious perspective. Then in paragraph 2, when I explain the alternative perspective, I have to explain it, but then I may evaluate it by expressing why I don't actually agree with that viewpoint. So this argument is not as strong as, however, as how could something have come from nothing? And if we were to accept a scientific perspective, we may wind up in a situation of infinite regress. That means we may be going back forever. And the final thing you'll need is a conclusion. And don't be too concerned if your paragraph 1s and paragraph 2s, if they have explanations with them, they should be longer than your conclusion. That's normal. So don't feel that you have to do anything in the conclusion other than answer the question very directly as to whether or not God is the first cause. Express your viewpoint explicitly. You don't feel like you need to summarise everything you've said, and don't introduce new material. Just answer in a fresh and original way that says to the examiner, do you know what, I bothered to answer your question, the question you chose today. It's a great question. Thank you, examiner. Thanks for putting me through this. I appreciate it. Now we get to the immortality unit, and I'm going to take you through this set of questions before we end this resource. And I have to admit, whenever I look at this unit in the paper, I've got a soundtrack going around my head. Don't know what that says about me, but never mind. Okay, explain briefly what is meant by legacy. And it's 2 marks, meaning we have to make 2 points. That means you need to declare 2 correct points or develop 1 point from the following range. Something including money or property handed down from an ancestor, something inherited, a way of being remembered after death, a way of living on through achievements, great art, literature, music. Or the example we always use is that at a wedding, when that uncle is sat down tired and they're not doing anything, and then a Michael Jackson song comes on, and they can't fight it anymore, and they get up and start dancing. There we go. This man has just affected the world from the grave, from after his death, through his legacy, through his music. That song, of course, about things coming back to life. Not very nice, though. Here we get another what do you think question. A legacy does not make someone immortal. Do you agree? And it's for 3 marks, so we need some developed reasoning alongside some simple points, but essentially it's 1 medium-sized paragraph. And you do not need to balance your response. This time I said I was going to argue largely against the statements, and also from the perspective of someone who is doubtful or critical of religious views. Some ideas from the mark scheme include the idea that a legacy is not completely endless. Once it's gone, it may never come back. Like, for example, you remember that guy, you know? And survival through memories and achievements is not really the same as actually living forever. You might be able to spot a mistake as well that I can put in to make sure that we're still on course for the spelling, punctuation and grammar. There's my full stop there at the end. These are written quite crudely and simply, and I understand in the exam you may develop slightly. I'm just a bit pushed for time, so trying to get through this. Okay, a 4-mark question. That's a substantial paragraph or 2 short paragraphs with at least 2 well-developed points. We're looking at referencing the evidence given for believing in the afterlife for 4 marks in this question. And I'm just going to write down quite briefly some of the evidence people may refer to that you would have to explain. This is unexplained, but you would have to explain it in the exam. Some people believe in the afterlife because they have seen ghosts. Some people, in fact, there's been a long legacy of people experiencing ghosts, mostly at sleepovers after several cans of Monster and watching a few scary movies, and just as everybody's getting tired, the likelihood of seeing a ghost, I'm sure, increases. Other bits of evidence may include near-death experiences, and we know that there are some commonalities between near-death experiences that would be worth mentioning here, like, for example, seeing lost loved ones, family members, God, or a light at the end of a tunnel. Another key idea is scripture, which is that some people believe in the afterlife as it says in their scripture about ideas such as resurrection. So plenty in there to be able to explain in order to get your 4 marks. Next question, and then explain what is meant by dualism for 3 marks. Explain what is meant by the idea of dualism, and you may use examples, means that you may get credit for your specific examples. So your answer may include that dualism is the idea that humans have 2 basic natures, physical and spiritual, and that at death the body may die and the soul may live on. The soul animates the body while alive, and it would be as simple as 1 mark, 2 marks, 3 marks, meeting the required amount. Okay, and this 6-mark question, you'll remember that I'll be arguing against the religious perspective. Don't worry that I argued in favour in one unit and against in another. The examiner does not come round to your house and check that these are your real views. Instead, they're interested in the skills and knowledge that you've developed and acquired. This question asked me to examine the statement, there is no such thing as a soul. If I'm against the religious perspective, then I'm going to agree that there is no such thing as a soul. Do you agree? And I'm going to suggest that I will. Give reasons, showing that you've thought about more than one point of view. Refer to religious arguments in your answer. 6 marks, which means we need at least 3 paragraphs. I've constructed my first paragraph. I agree there is no such thing as a soul. This is because science has not provided proof of a soul existing. That key word empirical, which just means scientific evidence, suggests that consciousness ends when the body dies and decays. The word soul, oh, that says world, so that's spelling. Sorry, I won't change it, it's where I'm typing on here. The word soul seems to be only useful in describing the personality of an individual, and there's my full stop. For the next 2 paragraphs, I'm going to write in shorthand, but we know that my next paragraph now needs to give the religious counter-argument, look at the reasons the religion provides, and then disagree with those. In my counter paragraph, therefore, where I'm going to present an alternative opinion as to whether or not there is a soul, and then ultimately find a reason to disagree with it. Now, I am struggling to fit all what we may recommend to write just on this PowerPoint. So where I'm using this format, I've reached the limit of what I can do in this short time. So this is just guidance and prompts for style, and I fully understand that in your examination you may refer to more reasons than the ones that I've mentioned here. My however paragraph begins, though, with, however, Descartes said that cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am, meaning that we consider ourselves to be the non-physical part of ourselves. This seems to correspond to the religious view, such as the Christian view, that we can live on after death through resurrection, as it says in John. You'll remember this quotation, here expressed slightly differently. It says in the Bible, I am the resurrection and I am the light, and whoever believes in me shall live on. And you can quote that piece of scripture as well In fact, we recommend using Scripture in any 6-mark answers that you can. But I've suggested here, however, the evidence from Scripture is weak, as it was made before modern science, often on testimonies of individuals, and it's unobservable or repeatable at this stage. And all that's missing from this answer is a bit of development before a conclusion, which is with your own opinion. And that's going to be it for my guidance on how to be more successful in 2 units of the 4. I'm going to have to go now because my son is just finishing his jam toast and the poor lad has had to sit here listening to me ramble on about this stuff during his breakfast. Haven't you, buddy? Mm-hmm. You've been listening to me? Mm-hmm. Do you want me to stop teaching the other people now?
Yep.